Well, good morning, everybody. I imagine you weren't expecting my voice this morning. Matt and I are on a bit of a rotation throughout the week on these forecast videos, but both Matt and Andrew have taken a well-deserved vacation, and so we're just kind of filling in the gaps here. Now, Andrew is an absolute magnet for tornadoes. I wish I had 10% of his storm-chasing talent and his capability of forecasting near-term, short-term severe weather. And, of course, where they're both on a short vacation in Wisconsin, of course, Andrew snagged this, and a lot of damage. I don't want to downplay what was going on here, but we did have a disturbance move through the midsection of the country. And yesterday's storm reports show those tornadoes here in southern Wisconsin, and more severe wind damage across the country, just continuing to push 2025, higher and higher on these total number of reports. And we're nowhere near done with our severe weather, as you'll see in just a few minutes here. I do want to show you one other thing, though. Last night, as we were watching just the flow of the atmosphere, the front did dig into the Midwest, and it left this low-level deformation zone. Now, if it was the middle of winter and I saw this, I would be calling for, feet of snow to come into this area. Well, maybe not that, but several inches at least. Dominant Bermuda high, though coming back to summer now. Dominant Bermuda high. This is the trough, believe it or not, that is a trough coming around the northern edge of this tropical disturbance that is moving its way toward Louisiana. But it was right along this frontal boundary. This is a place where we have frontogenesis, where the winds were colliding, and they were definitely doing that at the surface. I just rewound the clock late last night, and you can see the moisture in these high dew points in low to mid 70s. Temperatures were still in the 80s, and it was just colliding with much cooler air. Look at these temperatures in the 60s, and much cooler and drier air, and it was just hitting right in through here. Now, this was all linked up with the storm system that was connected to the one that Andrew saw. But right in this area around Kansas City, we saw some very, very large thunderstorms, and they had no reason to move. And the reason behind that, why they didn't have a reason to move, I guess it should say, is that the strength of the flow on this side of the front was basically the same as that. And so the front was stationary. We had opposing forces, and the air was just forced to rise in that area. You can see it on satellite just before the sunset. Can you find the boundary? There it is. Look, peeling down through parts of Illinois. Some nice storms that we needed in through here. They moved pretty quickly, did not provide as much rain as I had hoped for some of these dry areas in Illinois and Indiana. But do you find the boundary? Right there. And on the humid side, the cumulus cloud field just shows us the moisture ripping north, and then the storms just peeled off and just, broke out on that line. And along that line, we saw some large storms, and they repeatedly hit that area. Now, this is the sunset last night, and yes, you're seeing some wildfire smoke in this both from Canada and from the western United States. But if you want to see what it looked like bigger picture, this is an animation of infrared data, which is easier to see overnight. And again, there are those storms. Now, these were not the only kind of game in town. We had larger storms that left the East Coast. Watch again as it starts back. Look at this, coming up into parts of Ohio, Pennsylvania, Maryland. We talked about flash flooding throughout all week in this area. And then we have our tropical, disturbance that's moving its way toward Louisiana, and we're going to continue to see, heavy rains in this area. But you can almost watch this and just get a full sense of the flow of the atmosphere before I get into some details about the flooding that was going on last night near Kansas City. Can you kind of just wrap it in your head? See this? That's all Bermuda High doing. And then there's this front that just sags across the north, knocking temperatures back, thankfully, in this area. But even into the early morning hours as I'm recording this here, we're watch right in through here, deep convection continuing to go through parts of Kansas. Now, keep your eye on that here in just a few moments. So what it looked like on radar was this. And some of these storms, as they just kind of continue to sit on that boundary, not moving, have once again given us, all of our flash flood problems, which we've been talking about. The atmosphere, as we keep kind of overusing the term, but it's juiced. There's plenty of moisture in this, and we're recycling moisture that's in the soil. We're recycling evaporative water off of our crops, here as we get into midsummer. And that's what's providing all of this. It's just returning it to the ground. A couple of things to point out before I dig into this a little deeper just for a moment here. Take a look at the convection throughout the Four Corner states. And you can also see the storms that were coming through parts of Arizona. This is kind of some pre-monsoonal, well, maybe I guess we could call it full monsoonal flow here that's initiating these storms down in the southwestern United States. Okay, what I want to do is I want to take you over to the radar data. This is live radar data this morning. It's just, 6:45. I got a little bit of a late start. I was fixing some code I want to show you here in a few moments. But this is where the storms are currently sitting. And one of the nice things about our radar system is that we have access to some pretty incredible digital tools. So I want to show you this. I'm going to flip this over to let's go over here let's go just to storm total accumulation. So this is going to look at this particular event and see how much total rainfall fell out of this. And what you can do with this particular app, it's called Radar Scope, is you can grab this tool here, and as you hover, you'll be able to see these rainfall amounts. Now, these are radar estimated. So are they perfect? No, but it's the best possible way we can do that unless you have a rain gauge sitting underneath this. And we had a few places here. If you kind of find, I apologize if you live here and I'm pronouncing this wrong, but I'm just going to call it Olathe. And if you go south and west of it, some areas in through here picked up some very, very heavy rainfall. So thinking this through, as I mentioned, I'm working on some new stuff for all of you. And I want to take you to, first of all, the 24-hour precipitation map. Let's get an update on this because the 6 o'clock data is in. Now, I worked yesterday, not on this, you're going to see it soon, on turning this basically into an interactive map, which means you'll be able to do some zooming, get in real close, and then as you hover, you'll be able to see the amounts. I haven't got it finished yet, but it'll be up very soon on Ag Weather. I did have a comment yesterday that I read and took to heart. Someone said, gosh, your map said I got 2 inches, right? And I imagine you were looking at a map like this. And I want to be clear, when I make this map, all I do is I have a list of U.S. cities, and I try to get them pretty well spaced out. And I just put the precip value near it. So you may look at that and go, I didn't get 2 inches. I got 4 inches out of this, and I understand that. Or you may say, hey, this said I got 7/10. I got nothing. But the reality is the hyperlocal variability around this area is tremendous. So this map will get updated. I'm pretty excited about that. You'll be able to hover over it and see your values. But that is just a look at the Midwest only. I just wanted to zoom in and show you that to answer that one person's concern. Now, as I told you, I'm working on a new forecast system. Here we are. There's Olathe. So let's kind of go just south and west of it. And I dropped a pin near Gardner, and they still have all these flood warnings. I hit the National Weather Service API to see this. But in the last 24 hours, 7.76 inches of rain. And it is going to be steamy in the coming days as these temperatures crank back up into the 90s going forward. But I just wanted to show you that. Now watch. If I just go nearby, let's zoom back in there. I don't know. Let's pick here, Eudora. If I just click on that, and these numbers change. Look, 4.5. That's a 3-inch change just in a short few miles out of this particular storm system. So just another piece to the puzzle as we think all of this through. Now, what's interesting is this is an area that was going under some pretty strong flash drought scenario. I mean, this map, which always has a 1-day lag, showed that area where these storms just went through for the last 2 weeks had measured nearly nothing. And, as we look at this, we just have to understand that the way that these storms are behaving, it's just going to toss out the term again. It's very hyperlocal in how the rainfall is going to get delivered. So some of these red holes are going to get filled in this upcoming pattern. And I'm really concerned. Well, I'm really concerned, but also a bit excited that we're going to get this tropical disturbance bringing moisture into Louisiana and Mississippi and parts of Alabama and Arkansas. This is a drier area down here. And even though the National Weather Service and the National Hurricane Centers reduced the risk of this developing down to 30%, which there wasn't a whole lot of evidence it was going to get really strong, and we could talk about that at length, but the end result is 30% chance of developing here. We just see that the tracks of that low are expected to curl through Louisiana, which was getting drier. I'll be actually quite curious when the drought monitor updates here in a couple of hours if Louisiana had found itself back on the drought monitor before this. But overall, for the next 7 days, let's blow that up. This is what the next 7 days of total precip hold. Now, here's our story. This is going to be our active corridor, and we know that it's going to be running over a ridge that's going to be sitting at times in the next 2 weeks right here. This tropical system has snuck underneath it, and we're expecting heavy rains in this area going forward. We will see more monsoonal activity coming around the backside of that ridge. But basically, I mean, that's your corridor right there for the next several days. And to tell you that there's going to be severe weather, yes, I mean, you're going to see it. And the fact is, we've got open transport of moisture. I mean, here's just right now looking at the flow. So there's the circulation in the low levels of the atmosphere around, that system. We're going to pump some of that moisture here. We're going to watch out for severe weather there today. We're also going to be watching the Northeast, and we're going to watch for flooding around this particular event. But look right in the middle, just right in through here. There's your transport. That Bermuda high is such a dominant feature in this particular pattern. So over the next 2 weeks, this is it. This is the updated data, and I didn't expect to see much of a change in it, and we really didn't see that. So there's a pretty narrow corridor that lines itself through here that's going to have the most active weather in terms of heavy rainfall. Now, it's not as though we won't get moisture outside of this. It's just that the models have found that the strongest forcing, the ridge running capability of these storms, plus the fronts, the weak fronts that will sag into this area, will initiate a lot of rain. And that's the case. Now, I know you heard me say, well, wait a minute, we got some monsoonal flow going. Yeah, we do. Even though over the next 2 weeks it's still weak, it's there. They're starting to show up with, these storms coming into this area. All right, so let's get into some of the near-term details. Like I mentioned today, we're going to watch Montana, parts of Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. But you're going to see just daily storm chances in very similar corridors. And I do want to watch Saturday into this area, Illinois and Indiana, quite carefully. The maps I think we should lend more of our time to on our website here is just the CPC excessive rainfall outlooks. I mean, just watch these every 3 days. And if you're under those areas that they've identified, even with the slight risk, the chances of getting just very, very heavy rainfall are in the cards. So please take advantage of these just to stay aware of how this is expected to go. The newest artificial intelligence forecast model is giving us the same story. There's our blocking ridge, the upstream blocking, and we could say there's a bit of an omega look to this with these two troughs to the south. But we're going to be cooling off the west. There's a ridge building in from the east, and it's going to be delivering, quite a lot of, just range in the weather. Very hot and down south, very cool across the north and into the Canadian prairie, in between a tremendous amount of storms. But the heat that's coming on is going to be substantial. So this is what I've been working on. This is not live for all of you just yet, but I'll get it there. But this is the new website I'm going to try to build for you, or the new updates to the website. These images are going to load much, much faster. And I'm excited for that because it'll look better on mobile too. And the other part about this that I like, let's just take it out there to a week forecast. There we go. You can hover and now get your information. So just take a look at some of these rainfall totals in through here. Now, I'll get this up on the site soon so you have access to it. I apologize. I just wanted to show you what we're working on. And you'll be able to zoom into different regions and be able to see more local forecast information. I'm pretty pumped about this. So that is a 7-day forecast from the European model, the 0Z run today. And if you just look at it over the next 2 weeks, my concern is this hole and how expansive it will be. Because we know it's going to get hot in here, it's going to get drier in there, and these storms are going to be more linear in their structure, and while they have the potential for putting down very heavy rainfall, it's going to be the straight line wind issues, I think, that I'm going to be most concerned. But look at what the model's doing over the next 2 weeks with some of these rainfall totals. I mean, you can see it as clear as I can. Those are very, very high. So I'll get this up and going. It's going to take me, I apologize, it's going to take me a few weeks. Writing the code for this is just... I have to balance that with just my normal workload, but we'll get it there for you. All right, as I mentioned, I'm going to switch over to the GFS just because there's consistency in the models. Every day we see these, plumes of high moisture, very hot temperatures at the surface and relatively colder air aloft. And so there's no trouble getting, the atmosphere to destabilize. And as that occurs, we've just continued to see consistency in the model, especially as we get into next week. These areas are going to have to be watched carefully as we go forward. So I just want you to understand that threat of severe weather, as I mentioned, is real, and we need to be watching it very, very carefully. Now, if you're down here farther to the south, normally we see values like this here, especially in May. If you're down here, though, in the southern plains, what I'm concerned a lot about is, let's flip this over to cumulative wind gusts. And you can see that through the end of this week, there's Friday into Saturday, we're going to be getting some relatively strong winds, 30, 40 miles an hour, which is going to continue to increase that evaporative rate. But overall, on the precip side, best chance of getting an inch over the next 10 days is in that corridor. Just remember, these are going to be the same kind of thunderstorms we've been witnessing for a while. Locally, very heavy rainfall, but the ranges and rainfall totals will be just tremendous, okay? So there it is. We've kind of hit that pretty hard this week. I think everyone knows and understands what we're looking at with the flash flood potential and with the rainiest corridor. I should have a new model run in. Yeah, let's go back and get you the previous one so we can look out there a bit farther. This goes out 10 days. This is who's going to be on the drier side of average. So definitely the west. We'll see a lot of storms in the Four Corners states, but Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, that nose of very, very dry air is what's got me concerned. Because if we just dip this down to the chance of staying under 1/10 of an inch, some of the models are not putting down any rainfall in this area. Now remember, back in April and May, we were flooding this area out. That's how quickly the weather patterns can change in the southern plains. It's a constant source of change in this area. So coming back to my concern, over the next 7 days, I wish I could make a 15-day map out of this for you, but the National Digital Forecast Database runs us out 7. These evaporation rates of 2 to possibly up to 3 inches a week are what's alarming. Okay, so I just wanted to reiterate that point in today's forecast video. Okay, bigger picture. This is where we land by Monday. All right, so there's the trough in the west. There's the blocked up flow in the Gulf of Alaska, north of Hawaii. I want you just to keep an eye on this, because what we see is this ridge establishing itself first by next Wednesday over the lower Mississippi River Valley. And then the models have consistently tried to place this ridge by the end of the month firmly over the southern plains. Some of the forecast runs, as I mentioned yesterday, have got up to a 600 decameter ridge, so that's big. And there's a lot of heat under this. And so it appears that we finished the month with that ridge. Now the question is going to be, is it a 5-10 day feature, or is it just a permanent feature for weeks? And I'll tell you, this atmosphere has not given me any indication that it's overly excited about planting a ridge and just leaving it for weeks. Now I understand we're now midsummer, and my reasoning behind what I just told you was that the persistence in the pattern in spring doesn't give those indications. But I just want to make note that we need to watch this daily to see if the size of that ridge does in fact plant itself there. So given all of that, let's go look at the day 8 through 14 precipitation from all of our major models. And the concern is just seen here. Let's actually blow up the European just as an example. That area now looking out there firmly into week 2 being drier, while the northern tier of this is still quite stormy. It just seems to be the name of the game going into this last week of the month of July. Now, the temperature side of it, as I'm sure you're well aware, we're going to get hot next week. Now, is it several days of heat? And where's the heat going to be planted is the question we're going to try to ask and answer. Right now, the models are saying, look, that time period from the 24th through the 30th has repeated chances of getting very hot, but there's a high risk on the 24th and 25th of having excessive and hazardous temperatures here, which we've kind of been building this narrative. It's not today, though. I mean, the front's there. Remember at the beginning? Remember that deformation we talked about? Look at that. You can see it in the temperature field. And a major cool down has come here. The Northwest is very hot today. California, not so much. But stretching here deep in the 90s. Watch tomorrow. Getting into Saturday. This is now Sunday, Monday. Now you're looking at this going, well, these colors aren't that far up the scale. But you have to remember, this is the hottest time of year. So to be 8-9 degrees above average during the hottest time of year is substantial. It just doesn't show up dramatically on the color scale. But here we are by Monday, triple digits from the Panhandle through parts of Kansas, probably into Nebraska as well. Then you get up there, it's next Tuesday and Wednesday. This is as we approach that time frame where the very hazardous temperatures will be in this area, along with the humidity. And speaking of the humidity, we can make a graph of, or a map of apparent temperature. And as we watch, the end of this week, getting into next week, it's amazing. Look at the daily convection down here coming off the Gulf. Watch it cool things down. Ready? That's so fascinating. But anyways, as we get out there into early next week, that area that has these incredibly hot temperatures like Monday, Tuesday, getting into Wednesday. Let's just stop it right there. That's afternoon on Wednesday. Just so you see, this is 100 Fahrenheit. And this is a broad area in through here. In fact, we could probably just zoom in on that. U.S. regions. Let's just choose central. There you go. You can now start to see the heat index values projected for mid-afternoon. 105 to 110 degrees. Now watch this. As I take one step forward, did you notice that? The model next Wednesday is attempting to convect and to overturn and make a big storm here. Now, It's not gospel truth. It's a week from now, but it's suggesting that it could do that. About 6 days from now, produce these big storm complexes, and those are what I'm worried about. But broader idea on the temperatures, look at the Canadian Prairie Northern Plains for the next, look at the Southwest or the West. As we stretched out there day 5 through 10, there it is. This is remaining cool while this builds in quite a bit of heat. We come out here now to, the end of the time frame. I don't know. There's a couple things about this. I think we're cooler here. We might be cooler there as well, but the heat will probably be planted into the midsection of the country. Now, when does it break down? I think the answer to figuring that out is going to be in the tropics, but not in the local tropics. The local tropics are being dominated by, dust. So you probably heard a lot about this if you follow other meteorologists. We cover it. But I only want to tell you about it when I think it's a big deal. And this is a lot of dust coming off the Sahara. Now, I'm calling our local tropics here because most of you watching me are in the U.S. And this dust is working its way to kind of suppress tropical activity. There will be lots of posts showing up on social media of maps like this, which is from one of my favorite websites called weathernerds.org. And they just track tropical low pressure. And sometimes the models produce phantom storms, or they get excited about things, and you can see here on the very southern edge of the Bermuda High, what's going on. But I'll be honest, the wind shear, the farther west you get over here is quite high right now, so we need to consider what that may mean. Probabilities on developing something, well, we know we have this system, okay, but it's not very high yet. So what I'm trying to think about here is where across the world are we seeing any sort of substantial tropical development? And it'll be in the Western Pacific. I think you're going to have to keep your eye. So looking at these ocean temperatures, look how warm the waters are overall here. There's a tropical disturbance that's hit this area, bringing some cooler water here. But man, there's a lot of warm water. And as we watch the MJO, kind of, I don't know, is it going to do this? That will be the big question. We talked about that yesterday. That will help drive what could be some change in the pattern in early August. So in other words, we have this heat wave coming at the end of the month. Well, what happened at the end of June? Heat poured on. It was 7, 8, 9, 10 days, and then we got into July, and there was a shift, right? So I'm wondering if these MJO shifts, which are being kind of complemented by the tropical events, will make maybe make the CFSV2 close to right. Now you're saying, what do you mean? Well, this is the beginning of August, and notice it's trying to back the heat up in the west. I don't know. It's just a possible solution. It will all depend on how that tropical, convection works. But I think it's half a world away. I think it's over in the Western Pacific, because the European model is trying to do the same thing. Here's the next week. That's getting into week 2. We've talked about that. But as we get up there farther, watch it build heat west. Now that's into the beginning of August. This is the second week of August, the third week of August. It's going hot, but it's kind of redistributing that heat. And I'm just going to show it to you and understand that I've not been overly confident in this model, but I am just thinking it through, because if we see more tropical development here, like this is the next 10 days, there's something going on in the Philippines near Taiwan. It's moving toward China. We have to be aware that we can have tropical development here that ends up affecting the jet stream. And when it affects the jet stream, it can give us this downstream effect, here in the U.S., which is way off the map, or North America, that can't be ignored in mid to late summer. I think it could be a dominant factor. So I'll come back to the thing Matt and I have been harping on. There is a convectively coupled Kelvin wave that's moving in the MJO. Okay, that's 6 greens you see here. And it is going to change things. I think we're going to get better chances of tropical development in the Atlantic, but it's not like it's not like it's just going to explode with tropical activity before we finish July. It's just better conditions. What I want to know is, where does it reposition itself by the end of July? I mean, do we return the best rising motion here? And what does that do to affect or perturb the jet stream? So that's what we're going to have to watch. If you're curious, since the start of July, our jet stream has actually been relatively flat. See that? It's been displaced north. That's what's let the heat in. But that flatness, I think, is key to figuring out where our ridges are going to be. Because underneath this, the Pacific High has lived here, and the Bermuda High has lived there. Now, I want to show you something just as we wrap this up. Now that you know what I think we need to watch. We need to watch how this flow changes as a function of time going over the next 3 weeks. If that jet becomes a bit more loopy or shifts any farther to north, the heat is on and it'll stay on. If we start to bend it a bit though, and maybe it's disturbed here first and that sends some, for lack of a better phrase, some wiggles through the flow, it could really give us a week to week variability that could be very, very high. Now I'm going to show you a year ago. This is what the jet stream looked like, same time period a year ago. So this is this year, this is now this is where it was all bendy. Do you notice that? Look at this ridge here, and that ridge there, and that ridge there. That's what we were dealing with a year ago. And if you're curious what that did, underneath it, we were extremely wet in the Mississippi Valley, but right away in this part of the Ohio Valley toward the Appalachian Mountains, very dry. We were very dry in the Northwest and also very hot. This was one of the hottest Julys on record in the western states. And it just cooled down here. So we painted the corners with heat. Now my question is, do we get ourselves into something similar to this, or does all this heat come into here and we paint the corners cool for this July? That seems to be where it's trying to go. I shouldn't have been that aggressive with this, but maybe there is going to be cooler. Oh, and by the way, a cool July in the West is still hot. But that's just what happened a year ago, just to give you one example of how variable jet stream behavior can impact, what we feel, what we experience, and what the crop experiences. So pay attention to it with me. This year, last year up to this point in July, much different jet stream behavior, and I think that's going to help us clue in on where it might go for the rest of the month. All right, that's it. We'll talk again soon. Thanks.